Good day, ladies and gentlemen. Happy Monday. It's another great week. Are you ready for some revelation? Yes, Amy says it is now getting interesting. Yes, indeed. So, as I was just thinking through this section of Revelation 16 that we are in, and this is the text that has Armageddon in it, I was just reflecting on how pervasive this idea of Armageddon has become into the modern culture, right? It is proverbial for the great disaster. We have words like apocalyptic or the apocalypse, which of course simply means that which was hidden. From hiding is what apocalypse means. This is called apocalyptic literature that we're studying here in Revelation, but that has taken on a life of its own. So something that is apocalyptic, brings in the just extraordinary concepts of Revelation. But then Armageddon, similarly, since dispensationalism's rise, the many in the church and also in the world are waiting for the great battle of Armageddon. And of course, in the dispensational scheme, the church is raptured, at least according to most. There are different views of the rapture and the timing of the rapture even. But the idea is the church is taken out of the earth. So all the Christians leave planet Earth. If you've read The Left Behind or seen the movies or whatever, right? And then what is left is of course, unbelievers, and the Jews are the centerpiece of everything. And the 7-year tribulation and the great battle as the Antichrist makes a covenant with them and then turns against them, and there's this great battle, right? And all of that. And it has become this term for the great big war disaster that's coming. Yeah, Mary Beth, everything that bad happens now is Armageddon. And then so it becomes this transition from the devastating end times battle to anything that's hard we call Armageddon. Well, if I am correct about what's going on in Revelation, it was a great battle. It was apocalyptic in the sensational sense or the hyperbolic sense. And notice I'm using past tense. It was. I believe this Battle of Armageddon is the fall of Jerusalem in 70 AD. And I'll try to show you that. Yeah, Thief in the Night. Yep, some of you my age and older probably remember that movie that was used to scare so many people into professing faith. Kathy says teachings she's heard for 20 plus years. Scott says there'll be some good deals on used cars after the rapture. That's right. Rob says, who remember the film with the does that say with the title of this word? Is that what you're? I'm not sure what Rob, what you're asking there. Darren says, I saw a shoe on a power wire. Pretty sure that guy got wrapped. Okay. So, admittedly, the term Armageddon that we find here has some challenges with it, but I'm going to argue for my view of this from the greater context here, and we'll talk about the linguistic issue as well. Mary Beth says, I was depressed for 3 months when I found out I wasn't going to be raptured. Who is the Geddon person? Why must we arm him? Yeah, that's good. So is there a movie with, there's several movies with Armageddon in it, right? And songs and so on. It's just made its way into the pop culture. All right. Well, let's look at it. So chapter 16, verse 13 is kind of where we left off. And I saw coming out of the mouth of the dragon. Remember, the dragon is the ancient serpent who is called the devil and Satan. We saw that in an earlier chapter. So now coming out of this dragon, and out of the mouth of the beast. And if it's the first beast, then in my view, this is Roman Empire ideas. Then out of the mouth of the false prophet. We haven't met the false prophet before. Jesus did warn the false prophets coming, so there might be some tie in there. Or this could be another way of describing the second beast, which is Nero. Or I could be, making this too rigid in terms of what we've already seen. What all the images of the dragon, the beast, and false prophet, though I think we can tie some of that to historical events and characters, this is all the vision, the heavenly vision language. So I don't want to take away from that. So don't get too locked into some of the fulfillment and definition of images that we talked about earlier. Remember, he's seeing a vision in the heaven. So there's this dragon, this beast, this false prophet, and out of them come 3 unclean spirits like frogs. So I think that's what we're supposed to see. These are spirits, and he tells us these are spirits of demons. Now, I told you before, we see images, or John saw images, and he writes them, and it's easy to get too focused on the image. I do that too. I sort of just did it as I was tying the dragon, the beast, and the false prophet back to what we saw earlier. But we are given a specific explanation of what these are representing, or what they are. They are spirits of demons. Okay, so these spirits that are like frogs are spirits of demons, and they are doing signs which go forth to the kings of the earth and of the whole world. And that is not cosmos here. That is, the kingdoms of the earth, the inhabited earth. Oh, interesting. Let me just double check something here. Why did I not see this before? Pardon me. The kingdoms of... Okay, so the Texas Receptus. So this, the literal standard here says they go forth to the kings of the earth and the whole world. But you notice that the New American Standard just goes kingdom of the whole world, which is not the word cosmos. Interesting. I don't know. I missed that earlier. So it's, don't think of, let me just check and see what the, interesting. Okay, yeah, so the better Greek manuscripts and most of your English translations do not have kings of the earth and of the whole world. That's in the Texas Receptus, interestingly. So anyway, the word behind world here is oikomene, not cosmos. We've talked about that before, how the word oikomene means sort of inhabited earth. In some occasions is almost synonymous with the Roman Empire, but don't think the entire globe. That's not the intent here. Yeah, very good, Mary Beth. So Alfred says, plague of frogs. There's an allusion there, I think. Yeah, as all these plagues have allusions back to the 10 plagues. All right, so what he sees are these spirits of demons, and they go get the kings of the inhabited earth, and they bring them together to the battle of the great day of God Almighty. Very similar terminology to the great day of the Lord that we see all through the prophets. Okay? If you were to go back in those prophets, and we'll see how much time we have. I've gone through much of this before, so I'm not going to go through all of it, but the great day of the Lord is usually God's judgment on a people by another nation. And many times it's the Jews in Jerusalem. The great day of the Lord is God bringing his wrath against Jerusalem, which is exactly what I think's going on here, which dispensationalists would agree with. They still think we're waiting for it. And I believe this is describing the fall in 70 AD. All right, so that's what I see going on here. These demons are coming, and they're going to gather the kings of the earth, which I would take to be Rome, the Roman Empire, which fits with our view earlier of the dragon and the beast, and the second beast, if that's what the false prophet here is. And they're coming against Jerusalem in the 66 to 70 AD time frame, and this is the great battle, or the battle of the great day of God the Almighty. And then he says, "Behold, I come as a thief." And we looked at this last week. This is the same terminology that Jesus uses in the Olivet Discourse to talk about the coming desolation of Jerusalem, coming in his generation, which would fit the 70 AD time frame. And I argued that, this is first person here. So John is talking about what he saw, and then, "Behold, I come as a thief." Well, this I, that's not John, right? John's not saying that he is coming as a thief. He's quoting, and I think the LSV does right here by putting this in quotation marks. So now he's quoting Jesus saying, "Behold, I come as a thief. Blessed is he who is watching and keeping his garments, that he may not walk naked, and they may see his unseemliness." And we looked last week, this language is taken out of the Old Testament prophets, where God says, "I will drag my people through the streets naked and exposed when I judge them and humiliate them because of their wickedness." And Jesus had said, "I'm going to come, and you need to be alert. I'm going to come like a thief, and if you're not alert, then you will be caught off guard, and the consequences will be severe." So here John sees this vision of the demons bringing the kings of the earth to battle on the great day of the Lord, of God Almighty, and then he quotes Jesus, just kind of out of nowhere, grabs this quote of Jesus saying, "Behold, I come as a thief." And we talked about how I think he's tying this. This apparently was a popular proverbial statement Jesus made that churches knew about. Paul used it in 1 Thessalonians, for example. And he's tying this event here that he's describing, that he's seeing, with Jesus saying, "I'm coming as a thief." And someone put in a comment on a video last week, as a good observation, he's already used this same imagery in Revelation chapter 3. Remember what's going on in chapters 2 and 3? It's the warnings to the 7 churches in Asia Minor to whom this letter of Revelation is written. First century churches. He's warning them of what's coming. And in Revelation 3, he says, "Remember then what you have received and heard." He's not talking to you and me. He's not writing for the churches centuries later. He's writing to the first century churches in Asia Minor. He says, "Remember what you've received and heard, and keep and convert. If then you may not watch," if you're not on alert, "I'm coming to you," or on you, "as a thief, and you may not know what hour I will come." Right? He's warning them. "I'm coming as a thief." And now John uses that and quotes him again here to remind that Jesus comes here in the first century. Be ready. "And they brought them together to the place that is called in Hebrew Armageddon." Okay, so we'll come back and talk about that. Let me give you sort of the rest of this little passage here of why I think this is Jerusalem in 70 AD. Why does he call this, why does he refer to the Hebrew name? At least it makes sense to me that he is tying this to something the Jews would be concerned about. Hebrew name. Again, we'll come back here in a moment and talk about the actual word Armageddon. "And then the 7th messenger poured out his bowl on the air, and there came forth a great voice from the temple of heaven, from the throne, saying, 'It is done. Now, I mentioned this is not tetelestai. It is finished. It's not the same verbiage that Jesus issued from the cross, so don't try to tie that. But the voice comes and says, God has poured out his seventh and final bowl of wrath, and it has occurred. It has finished. And there came voices and thunders and lightnings, and a great earthquake came, such as not come since men come on the earth, so mighty an earthquake, so great. Now, we have seen all of this language many times in Revelation. Voices or sounds can be translated either way. Thunders, lightnings, earthquakes. And each time I've tried to show you all of those sensual experiences. And by sensual, I mean what the senses perceive, right? Lightning and thunder and noises and earthquake. All of that ties back to Mount Sinai. What happened at Mount Sinai? The giving of the law, the 10 words of the covenant, which were the stipulations, the requirements of the covenant God made with the Jewish people, with the Israelites at Mount Sinai. And he said, if you obey all of my commandments, I will bless you and prosper you. If you disobey all of my commandments, if you don't keep all of them, if you disregard what I've told you, if you disobey the 10 commandments and so on, I will bring devastating curses on you and make you perish. Those were the terms of the covenant. And the giving of the covenant was emotionally aroused by the trumpet and the smoke and the fire and the lightning and the earthquake and the thunder and all of those things. And what have we seen through Revelation? The 7 trumpets, right? So we've seen all of these things repeatedly attached to God's judgment on Israel because they broke the covenant that started at Sinai with all of these noises and such. So for my money, just everything about this is screaming at me judgment on Jerusalem. Let me show you one more. Here in verse 18, I just read with the voices, thunders, lightnings, and earthquakes and such. Look at this phrase. Such as has not come since men came on the earth. Right? So all of this devastation is going to be unlike anything that has happened before. You see that? Such as has not come since men came on the earth. Have we seen that language before? Anybody? There's voices, thunders, lightnings, great earthquake, such as not come since men came on the earth. Have we seen anything like that? The blasting of the voices, the suffering, the intensity of all that's happening is going to be unlike anything that has happened before this. Do you know where we've seen that before? Anybody? Anyone? Ronnie says, I've always paralleled these verses with the strong delusion in 2 Thessalonians 2:11. You're talking about the frogs, the demons, that kind of thing. We will look, when we finish Revelation, there are several major passages that we will have to look at, and 1st and 2nd Thessalonians contains some of those. So yeah, good thought. We'll come back to that. Maribeth says Joel or Daniel. Trucka says Old Covenant. Okay. You're onto something here. So the first place I want to go to is Matthew 24, the Olivet Discourse. Whenever, therefore, you may see the abomination of desolation, that was spoken of through Daniel the prophet standing in the holy place. Remember, this is parallel to Luke 21. And in Luke 21, instead of the abomination of desolation, it says, when you see the armies surrounding Jerusalem. So when the Romans, led by Vespasian, then Titus, when they come to the city limits of Jerusalem, that's the abomination of desolation here. Whoever's reading Daniel, let him observe. Then those in Judea, let them flee to the mountains. He on the housetop, do not let him come down to take out anything of his house. He in the field, do not let him turn back to get his garments. Woe to those with child and to those giving suck in those days, and pray that your flight may not be in winter nor on a Sabbath, for there will then be great tribulation, such as was not from the beginning of the world until now, nor may be. And if those days were not shortened, no flesh would have survived or been saved. But because of the chosen, those days will be shortened. See this language right here? There will be such great tribulation, such as was not from the beginning of the world until now. Very similar to, to such as has not come since men came on the earth. This, all that's happening here in Revelation 16. See that? All right, so we hear Jesus say this. This will be such great tribulation as has not come from the beginning of the world. And our tendency is to think, is he making an absolute statement? He says, such as, never has happened. This tribulation is going to be so great as has not happened, nor will be in the future. And then we start thinking about what we know, the Holocaust, for instance, and Pol Pot, and on it goes. Maybe Jesus is not intending to make an absolute statement here, but rather he's speaking of the fulfillment of prophecy. Now, don't get me wrong. I think I will show you the destruction of Jerusalem in 70 AD was horrific, but this language has occurred before. Remember, he just said, when you see the abomination of desolation that's spoken of through Daniel, so he's expecting his disciples here to know something about Daniel. Well, let's remember what Daniel said. This is chapter 12, verse 1. And at that time, Michael, the great prince, shall stand up, that stands over the children of thy people. Daniel's people. Who were Daniel's people? The Jews. So at this time, whenever this time is, Michael's going to stand up, and there shall be a time of tribulation. Such tribulation as has not been from that time that there was a nation on the earth until that time. See this? So Daniel is seeing and perceiving what's coming. And he's told this is going to happen in the last days, which we now know is the first century. And he's eventually tells Daniel, just seal this up and put it away. You're going to go rest with your fathers, and you're not going to experience this. But what's going to happen at that time is that there will be such tribulation on your people, Daniel, on the Jews. Such tribulation that has not been from that time since there was a nation on the earth. Jesus quotes that, or at least alludes to that same language. There'll be such great tribulation, such as was not from the beginning of the world until now. And John pulls that and says, there's a great earthquake and so on, such as has not come since men came on the earth, so mighty an earthquake, so great. I don't know if there were great earthquakes or not in the fall of Jerusalem, but the language all ties directly to fulfillment of what Daniel said and what Jesus said. And now John sees it is done. So all of this screams so loudly to me that I can't hear anything else. This whole section is the fall of Jerusalem in 70 AD. Now, I asked Grok, because I remembered that Josephus had made a statement about something similar, like nothing so horrific has ever occurred before. So I asked Grok, and sure enough, let me show you what Grok said when I asked it, did Josephus make a statement like this? He says, yes. See at the top there? This is a quote from the Jewish War, Book 5, Chapter 10. No other city has ever endured such miseries, nor has any age from the beginning of the world produced a generation more prolific in wickedness than this was. Do you hear it? You hear how similar? So here's Josephus. He is not a Christian. He's not in any way concerned to prove or vindicate Jesus' prediction. Rather, simply having observed what happened when Rome destroyed the Israelites in Jerusalem, he says, no other city has ever endured such miseries, nor has any age from the beginning of the world produced a generation more prolific in wickedness. So then Grok summarizes, the statement reflects Josephus' view that the suffering and destruction during the siege of Jerusalem were unparalleled in history up to that point. He documented the horrors of the siege, including famine, internal strife among Jewish factions, and the eventual destruction of the Second Temple, which was a catastrophic event for the Jewish people. Context of the event: the siege. The Roman army led by Titus besieged Jerusalem for several months, leading to an extreme famine and desperation within the city. Josephus describes people resorting to eating leather and even cannibalism to survive. Do you remember when we read the curses of the covenant in Deuteronomy 28 and Leviticus 26? And in that, God said, if you disobey my commandments and break my covenant, it will be so bad, I will starve you so horrifically that mothers will boil their children, and the smell of the burning will waft through, and people will come, and the mothers will hide their babies so that they won't have to share with anyone. And Josephus records that in the 66 to 70 time period, especially toward the end, that's exactly what mothers did. Centuries and centuries prior to the fact, God told the Jews, this is what you will do if you break my covenant. And Josephus saw it with his own eyes. That's what he means here by they resorted to cannibalism to survive. Then the destruction of the temple, the Second Temple, the center of Jewish worship, was burned and razed, fulfilling... Oh, interesting here. I didn't notice this before. Grok is telling us this fulfills Jesus' prophecy in Matthew 24. Interesting. This event marked a turning point in Jewish history, leading to the diaspora and the end of temple-based worship. The impact on the population: Josephus estimated that over 1 million Jews were killed during the siege, and tens of thousands were enslaved. While these numbers are debated, the scale of the tragedy is undeniable. So all of that, for me, screams that what John saw here, what these 7 bowls are, culminate in the fall of Jerusalem in 70 AD. Yep, Jim, you're right on. Daniel 12 was after 586, so it couldn't have been referring to that. Very good. All right, so let's then go back to Armageddon. So, again, I think it's interesting that he mentions that this great battle took place in a place that's called in Hebrew Armageddon. All right, so there's so many things challenging here. First of all, there is no place in the scripture called Armageddon. In Hebrew, probably the A-R here, is the Hebrew word har. Do any of you know what the Hebrew word Har, or at least that's the English transliteration, what does har mean in Hebrew? It's a fairly common word in the Old Testament. Anybody? Anybody? What is har? Yeah, very good, Mary Beth. It means mountain. So the assumption is that Armageddon, or Megadon, which is the Greek word, would be mount, or the mountain of Megadon. And Megadon is the Greek rendering of Megiddo. So Mount Megiddo, or the mountain of Megiddo. And the word Megiddo, the place Megiddo, does occur a few times in the Old Testament. There is a battle in Judges chapter 5, verse 19. There's a battle that takes place in Megiddo. Here's the problem linguistically. There is no mountain in Megiddo. Megiddo is not a mountain. In fact, it is just the opposite. It is a valley. You see the problem? This great battle takes place in what is called in Hebrew the mountain of Megiddo. Whereas the only Megiddo that we know of is a valley, not a mountain. It's just the opposite of a mountain. So that's a problem. It doesn't make any sense. Why would he call a valley a mountain? And why specify it's in Hebrew when you would look up in Hebrew and say, okay, let's go see what we can find out about the mountain Megiddo and find out, oh, it's not a mountain, it's a valley. Okay. So Michael Heiser, which some of you are big fans of, I know, and referred me to him. And I mentioned a few months ago when somebody first mentioned to him, I read Unseen Realm and Angels and Demons, and I think I read 4 of his books. A lot of good stuff in there. But he argues that Megiddo is not the right rendering of Megadon, but it should be Moed. So it'd be Mount Moed. Now, Moed is a very common word in the Old Testament. It means a gathering or an assembly or a meeting. And in fact, the tabernacle is referred to numerous times as the tent of Moed, the tent of meeting. And so Heiser argues that this is not Mount Megiddo, it's Mount Moed, and the idea is it is the mount of assembly or meeting, and the mountain that is the most important place for meeting in the Old Testament is Zion, which is Jerusalem, or in Jerusalem. Okay? So he's arguing that we shouldn't think Mount Megiddo, we should think Mount Moed, which is Jerusalem. And then he pulls in several Old Testament prophecies that the great battle is going to take place in Jerusalem, because that is true. We've looked at some of those. We could look at more. Now, he was not, he did not hold to a first century fulfillment of this. He's still, I think, and some of you are more familiar with his writing than I am, but I'm pretty sure he argues that this is still a battle that's coming. I don't think he was dispensational, but he still sees this Armageddon as future and centered on Jerusalem, whether or not it is the literal Jerusalem. Darren, I saw you with me, and I know you've spent some considerable time with Heiser's work. Am I capturing his view correctly, that he would say this is still future, but not necessarily tied to literal Jerusalem? If you know that. If you don't know that, then that's fine too. So I don't find the Mount Moed argument persuasive. It sure looks to me like he's saying Mount Megiddo or Mountain of Megiddo. the transliteration from Megiddo to Greek in the Old Testament is Megadon. I don't know. It's a stretch, in my view, to take this and not see it as mountain and Megiddo. However, he does make one other point that is consistent with my position, that John is pulling together two concepts in Zechariah that push this to Jerusalem. So we have looked extensively at Zechariah. We did a whole series on it, and then I referred back to it again and again and again and again. So I'm not going to rehash all of it. I'm just going to draw this, but you can look back at it. Now, we went through it in our series on Zechariah. We went through it primarily from the Septuagint and looked at what the Greek had to say. And so we came to chapter 12, verse 11, and it says here, on that day, the mourning in Jerusalem, that's M-O-U-R, right? So this is great weeping and suffering. The great mourning in Jerusalem will be great, like the mourning for a pomegranate orchard cut down in the plain. So that's more or less what the Greek says here. So there's going to be this day coming when there's going to be such mourning in Jerusalem. This going to be like on this plain where this orchard is, which was their sustenance and their ripe fruit was delicious, and it was a sign of God's blessing and so on. It's all cut down. And so there's going to be mourning and so on. The Hebrew says, and look at this, I'll go to the literal standard here. The Hebrew says, in that day, great is the mourning of Jerusalem as the mourning of Hajorimon in the valley of Megadon. And then the Hebrew says, and the land was mourned, every family apart, the family of house of David apart, women, family of house of Nathan, and so on, which is what we looked at in the first chapter of Revelation, when the tribes, all the tribes will see him and they will mourn, which tied this an earlier part here in Zechariah to the first century. So what I'm persuaded of, and it's not perfect, which I suppose is true of everything we see in Revelation, right, is that he's pulling these two things together. Now, it's still, the reason it's less than perfect here is because he doesn't say the mountain of Megiddo, because there is no mountain of Megiddo. He says the valley. But there was a great battle here in Megiddo, which apparently the mourning was so great it left a mark. He could refer to this and people would get it. This was devastating. And he ties this suffering and weeping to what's going to happen in that day in Jerusalem. So as I put all this together, if it were just that, I would not be persuaded. But the fact that everything in this vision in Revelation 16, to me, screams Jerusalem, 70 AD, all that, I lean toward it actually tying to Megiddo. The mountain is just hard unless he is using Megiddo there as a metaphor. The battle and destruction in Megiddo is a metaphor, and he's pulling the mount together, the mountain, Mount Zion, Jerusalem, that kind of thing. So for what it's worth, that's what I do. That's what makes the most sense of Armageddon. It doesn't help anything, by the way, to look at this as future. You see what I mean? Dispensationalists can't come here and say, see, there's going to be a great battle in the mountain of Megiddo. There is no mountain of Megiddo. It's a valley. And a valley is not a mountain. So they still can't simply use the terminology to prove this is a future fulfillment. It doesn't work. So don't let anybody convince you of that. The point is, what is the context? Where does it lead? And for my money, it leads here. So I see all of this as pointing. Armageddon was the destruction of Jerusalem in 70 AD. So there's my argument. Let me see some of what you have said here, and then we will call it a day. Alfred says Mount Carmel. Are you tying Mount Carmel to what? Catriel says I made it. Welcome. Did you make it in time for the song, Catriel? Mary Beth says mountain also represents powers, authorities, rulers. It can, yeah. Sana says, I know lots of covenanters hold to Revelation being future. Yeah, they do. Almost everybody does. I mean, it's by far the most popular view in the last couple centuries. Amy says, makes so much sense for the final battle to happen on God's mountain. So I don't know when that comment came in. Is that the final battle meaning our future, or the final battle? What would you see as the final battle there, Amy? Ruth says, C.S. Lewis said that if Jesus... you're getting cut off here. Dale says, Strong says it's a proper name for imaginary place. I see it like Mount Sinai. It's the mountain of judgment, which would also fit with the Jehoshaphat idea that we saw in Joel 3, something like that. Yeah, so I'm imaginary is a fairly common in the lexicons. Heard one thought. This is Saifu Scott Wright. One thought on Megiddo, saying it was the mountain that was the name of some of the great defeats in the plain of Megiddo out of the Old Testament. The problem is, I don't think there's any mountain anywhere near what's called the plain of Megiddo. I mean, if I'm incorrect, somebody correct me. But so that kind of statement, it's the mountain of some of the great defeats in the plain of Megiddo. That just doesn't make sense if there's no mountains in Megiddo. Megiddo, symbol of defeat and desolation. And if that's true, then it makes sense that it would be Jerusalem in 70 AD, right? Zechariah 3:7, the mountain becomes a plain, referring to a person. Well, I'm not convinced that that's what Zechariah 3:7 is saying. So, closest mountain is that valley in Mount Carmel. Okay. All right. Well, anyway, I'll just say that I don't think anybody can make a compelling, persuasive case on the term Armageddon. So I wouldn't base anything on that. At least that's my opinion. Could be wrong, but I don't. That's the least persuasive and least important of everything here in Revelation 16, in my view. Everything else points toward judgment on Jerusalem. All right, Ruth says, C.S. Lewis, most embarrassing verse in Bible if Jesus' prophecy in Matthew about all these events didn't occur. Yeah, I would agree. Jesus says it so clearly, right? It's going to happen in my generation, which so many of the ties here are to what John sees here in Revelation. Not a literal mountain, correct? Yeah. All right, so we'll leave it there. Tomorrow, Mary Beth and Amy calling you out, and you call me out. You already have. I believe starting tomorrow in the next verse, we switch now to where almost everything from this point forward is the fall of Jerusalem, the fall of Rome. I believe he just said it is done. Jerusalem and God's judgment and wrath is done on Jerusalem, and now he's turning to Rome. So read ahead and have that thought in mind as you read it. Maybe I won't persuade you, and that's fine, but at least give me a hearing. Mary Beth says Freudian slip. I love it. Scott says probably a lot of stuff we're missing, but it comes to light. It's going to prove even more convincing. It's AD 70. Yeah. If you read in context, this Dale verse 16 says a place called Armageddon. The next mention a place. Yeah, I don't think the great city is Jerusalem. I think the vision switches there. So we'll come back and see that tomorrow. All right, everybody, have a great one. Those who have ears, let them hear. Yep. Have a great one. We will see you all tomorrow. Grace and peace to you.